The blood-stained dust whirled in the late afternoon sun as Zachary Coleman dragged a limp body behind the livery stable, his weathered face contorted with cruel satisfaction. In the small frontier town of Ogden, Wyoming Territory, 1875, secrets could be buried as easily as bodies, but some truths refused to stay hidden beneath the parched earth. Zara Hayes pressed her raw wrists against her torn skirt, wincing as the rough fabric touched the inflamed skin where rope had bitten deep. 3 days. She had been bound for 3 days in that windowless shack, while Zachary Coleman decided whether to kill her or sell her to the men who frequented his saloon. The choice had never been hers, not since she'd overheard his conversation with the railroad men, not since she'd learned what he'd done to her father's land. Her legs trembled as she stumbled through the brush away from town. Every shadow seemed to follow her, every rustle in the sagebrush a potential pursuer. Zachary would discover her missing soon, and when he did, the punishment would be swift and merciless. The setting sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming plains as Zara pushed forward. Her throat burned with thirst, and hunger twisted her stomach into knots. She had no destination in mind, only away. Away from Coleman, away from Ogden, away from the memory of her father's body swinging from the old cottonwood tree with a forged suicide note pinned to his chest. Night fell quickly, and with it came the biting cold of the high plains. Zara's thin dress offered little protection against the chill. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering as she struggled to continue. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark sentinels against the star-filled sky. If she could reach them, perhaps she might find shelter or a trapper's cabin, or her foot caught on a rock, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The impact drove what little air remained from her lungs. Exhaustion and desperation overwhelmed her, and for the first time since her escape, tears streamed down her dust-covered face. "Please," she whispered to the indifferent stars, "please help me." As if in answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Panic surged through her body. They had found her already. Coleman's men would drag her back to Ogden, and this time there would be no escape. Zara forced herself to her feet, searching desperately for a place to hide. But the open plains offered no refuge, only scattered sagebrush and the occasional rocky outcropping. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. She could run or she could fight, but she could not hide. Taking a deep breath, Zara picked up a jagged stone. If Coleman's men were going to take her, she would not go quietly. The rider appeared over the rise, a solitary figure silhouetted against the night sky. Just one man, not the posse she had feared. Still, one of Coleman's hired guns was dangerous enough. The horse slowed, its rider apparently having spotted her. "Hello there," a deep voice called out. Not the voices she knew from Coleman's saloon. This one was different, cautious but not threatening. "Stay back," Zara warned, raising the stone. "I will defend myself." The rider stopped his horse and slowly raised both hands. "I mean no harm, miss. You seem to be in some trouble standing out here in the dark." "I am fine," she lied, "just taking a walk." A low chuckle came from the rider. "A mighty long walk from anywhere I know of." He dismounted, keeping his distance. "Name's Reed Calloway. I've got water and food if you're in need." The mention of water made Zara's parched throat constrict painfully. Still, she did not lower her makeshift weapon. "How do I know you're not one of Coleman's men?" "Coleman?" The man sounded genuinely confused. "Don't know any Coleman. I'm just a rancher heading back to my place after delivering some cattle to Fort Laramie." Zara studied him warily in the moonlight. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, not the flashy attire of Coleman's hired guns. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but something in his stance seemed honest. "Water first," she finally said, "then we'll talk." Reed Calloway moved slowly, retrieving a canteen from his saddle. He approached her with measured steps, then tossed the canteen so it landed at her feet. "It's fresh. Filled it at a spring not 3 hours ago." Zara snatched it up, keeping her eyes on the stranger as she took a desperate drink. The cool water was like heaven on her parched throat. She gulped greedily, water spilling down her chin in her haste. "Easy now," Reed cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She forced herself to slow down, lowering the canteen. As she did, the sleeve of her dress slipped back, revealing the raw, rope-burned flesh of her wrist. Reed's posture changed instantly. His body stiffened, and though she couldn't see his eyes clearly in the darkness, she felt his gaze fix on her injured wrists. "Who did that to you?" His voice had changed, the easygoing tone replaced by something hard and cold. Zara quickly pulled her sleeve down. "No one." "Madam," Reed said quietly, "those are rope burns. Someone had you tied up." She remained silent, clutching the canteen like a shield. Reed took a step closer, then stopped when she tensed. "I've got a small camp set up about a mile back. Fire's still going. There's food and blankets. You're welcome to come back with me, get warm, eat something." He paused. "Or I can give you supplies and you can be on your way, your choice." The offer of a fire and food was tempting beyond words. Still, Zara hesitated. Trust had nearly gotten her killed before. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. Reed was quiet for a moment. "My ma taught me that a person's character is judged by what they do when no one's looking. Out here, someone in trouble needs help, you give it." He gestured to her wrists. "And someone who'd bind a woman like that, well, they deserve a reckoning." There was something in his voice, a simple conviction that resonated with truth. Zara had been a good judge of character once, before Coleman had destroyed her faith in humanity. Something told her that this Reed Calloway was different. "One night," she finally agreed. "By the fire, then I'll be moving on." Reed nodded. "Fair enough." He turned toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "It's not far, but you look about ready to drop." Zara straightened her shoulders. "I can ride." Reed helped her onto his horse, then took the reins and led the animal back the way he had come. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait nearly lulled Zara to sleep, her body finally recognizing how completely exhausted she was. True to his word, Reed had a small camp set up in a sheltered hollow. A modest fire crackled, casting a warm glow over a simple bedroll and saddle. He helped her down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Sit," he urged, guiding her to a flat rock near the fire. "I've got some rabbit stew keeping warm." Zara sank onto the rock gratefully, extending her hands toward the flames. The warmth was glorious after the chill of the night. Reed moved efficiently around the camp, ladling stew into a tin plate. When he handed it to her, Zara found herself staring at the first real food she'd seen in days. The stew was simple rabbit, wild onions, and a few herbs, but the aroma made her mouth water. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the plate. Reed nodded, serving himself a portion before sitting on a fallen log across the fire. He ate quietly, not pressing her with questions, allowing her the dignity of satisfying her hunger without scrutiny. When she had finished, he offered her coffee from a battered pot. Zara accepted gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "I'm heading to my ranch," Reed said after a while. "It's about a day's ride northwest of here. Small place, but it's mine. Got a spare room where you could rest up proper if you've a mind to." Zara stared into her coffee. "You don't know anything about me." "I know someone hurt you," he replied. "I know you're running from something, and I know that whatever you did or didn't do, no one deserves to be bound like that." His voice hardened slightly. "No one." She looked up at him then, really seeing his face in the firelight for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way. His eyes, she noted with surprise, were a striking blue that seemed to reflect the firelight. "My name is Zara Hayes," she said finally. "My father owned a small ranch outside of Ogden. When he refused to sell to Zachary Coleman, Coleman murdered him and made it look like suicide." Her voice trembled slightly. "I was going to go to the territorial marshal with proof, but Coleman caught me. He kept me tied in an old shack for 3 days while he decided what to do with me." Reed's expression darkened. "Coleman, he the one who put those marks on your wrists?" Zara nodded. "He owns half the town now, the saloon, the mercantile, even the sheriff." "How'd you get away?" A bitter smile curved Zara's lips. "His man got careless, left a knife too close when he brought my water. I waited until night, cut myself free, then ran." She looked down at her torn dress and dirty hands. "I've been running ever since." Reed was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Coleman," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "Zachary Coleman." "You asked me to trust you," Zara said. "Now I need you to trust me. Coleman is dangerous. He has men who will kill for him without question." She leaned forward. "If you're truly offering me shelter, you need to know that danger might follow." Reed looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers across the fire. Miss Hayes, I was raised on danger. My pa died fighting Confederates at Antietam, my brother in a range war when I was 16. I built my ranch with my own 2 hands, fought off rustlers, and survived 2 winters so harsh they're still talked about in these parts. He took a sip of his coffee. I can handle whatever Coleman might bring. Zara studied him, weighing his words against her fear. One night at your ranch, she finally said. Then I'll decide my next move. Reed nodded. Fair enough. He stood, stretching his tall frame. You take the bedroll tonight, I'll keep watch. You don't need to, I always keep watch, he interrupted gently. Habit from the trail drives. Besides, I'd rest easier knowing you're safe. Zara wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. Her body ached with fatigue, and the prospect of sleeping on something other than hard ground was too tempting to resist. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Reed, he corrected. Out here, formalities don't much matter. Reed, she repeated, testing the name. Thank you, Reed. As she settled into his bedroll, the scent of leather and horses and something uniquely him surrounded her. Despite her wariness, despite the danger that surely pursued her, Zara felt safer than she had in days. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Reed's face when he had seen her injured wrists, the flash of protective fury in those blue eyes. No one had shown such concern for her since her father died. Dawn broke with gentle fingers of light stretching across the eastern sky. Zara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. The events of the previous day came flooding back her escape, her desperate flight, the stranger who had offered aid. Reed sat on the same log as the night before, his rifle across his lap, blue eyes alert as he scanned the horizon. When he noticed her stirring, he offered a slight nod. Coffee's hot, he said, gesturing to the pot nestled in the coals of the fire. Zara sat up, wincing as her body protested the movement. Despite the relative comfort of the bedroll, her muscles ached from days of confinement followed by her desperate flight. Thank you, she said, her voice rough with sleep. Have you been awake all night? Reed shrugged, got used to short sleep on cattle drives. He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over. How are you feeling this morning? Zara accepted the cup, cradling it in her hands. Sore, but better. She took a sip, the bitter liquid warming her from the inside. I'm still not certain coming to your ranch is wise. Because of Coleman. Because I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Reed checked his rifle before setting it aside. Trouble has a way of finding folks out here, whether they invite it or not. He began packing up their small camp with efficient movements. My offer stands. You're welcome to come to my ranch, rest up, figure out your next move, or I can give you supplies and point you toward the next town. Zara watched him work, noting the quiet competence in his movements. There was something reassuring about Reed Calloway, a steadiness that spoke of a man who knew his own mind and stood by his word. If I come with you, she said slowly, I need your promise that we'll be cautious. Coleman will have men looking for me. Reed paused in his work. Miss Hayes, Zara, I promise you this, no one will bind you again, not while I draw breath. The simple, solemn vow hung in the morning air between them. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny fracture in the wall of fear and distrust she had built around herself. Then I accept your offer, she said. For now. They broke camp quickly after that, Reed's experienced hands making short work of the task. He helped Zara onto his horse before mounting behind her. The closeness was uncomfortable at first. Zara had to force herself not to stiffen when his arms reached around her to take the reins, but as they rode, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence at her back gradually eased her tension. The Wyoming landscape unfurled before them, vast and beautiful in the morning light. Distant mountains stood sentinel along the horizon, while the rolling plains stretched in all directions, dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood near hidden creeks. Your ranch, Zara said after they had ridden in comfortable silence for some time. Is it large? Reed adjusted his hat against the morning sun. Not compared to some, 500 acres, give or take, enough for my small herd and some crops. There was pride in his voice as he added, built the house myself. 2 rooms at first, then added on as I could. It's not fancy, but it's solid. You live alone. Got a hired hand, Miguel. Good man, been with me 3 years now, comes from somewhere down Mexico way. Doesn't talk much about his past, and I don't ask. Reed shifted slightly in the saddle. Also got 8 horses, 32 cattle, a milk cow named Bessie, and the orneriest mule God ever created. Despite everything, Zara found herself smiling. The mule has a name. Congressman, Reed said dryly, on account of he brays a lot and doesn't do much useful work. A small laugh escaped Zara, surprising her. It had been so long since she had found anything amusing. They rode through the morning, stopping briefly to rest the horse and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. As they continued, Reed pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory. His deep voice was soothing, and Zara found herself relaxing incrementally as the miles passed beneath the horse's hooves. By mid-afternoon, they crested a gentle rise and Reed pointed ahead. There it is, Calloway Ranch. Zara followed his gesture and saw a modest homestead nestled in a shallow valley. A small creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. A sturdy log house stood near the water, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Nearby was a barn and corral where several horses grazed peacefully. Beyond, she could see fenced pastures where cattle dotted the landscape. It wasn't grand or imposing, but there was something about the neat, well-tended property that spoke of care and pride. This was a home, not just a house. It's lovely, Zara said honestly. Reed's arms tensed slightly around her. It's not much, but no, she interrupted. I mean it, it's truly lovely. He relaxed, and she could hear the smile in his voice as he replied, Thank you. Let's get you settled then. As they approached the ranch, a figure emerged from the barn, a man of medium height with dark hair and a weathered face. He raised a hand in greeting, then paused when he noticed Zara. That's Miguel, Reed explained, returning the wave. They rode into the yard and Reed dismounted before helping Zara down. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she was grateful for his steadying hand on her elbow. Miguel approached, his expression curious but polite. Senor Reed, he greeted, his English accented but clear. Did not expect you back so soon. Change of plans, Reed replied. He turned to Zara. Miguel Herrera, this is Miss Zara Hayes. She'll be staying with us for a time. Miguel nodded respectfully to Zara. Welcome to Calloway Ranch, Miss Hayes. Thank you, Zara replied. Reed handed the reins to Miguel. Would you mind seeing to Jupiter? Miss Hayes and I have had a long ride. Of course. Miguel led the horse toward the barn, glancing curiously over his shoulder as he went. Reed guided Zara toward the house. Let's get you inside, you look dead on your feet. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, several chairs, and a small sofa positioned near the stone fireplace. Shelves held books and a few personal items. Everything was neat and clean, if somewhat spartanly furnished. The spare room's through there, Reed said, pointing to a door at the back of the house. It's small, but the bed's comfortable enough. Zara stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by the normality of it all. After days of terror and flight, the quiet domesticity of Reed's home seemed almost unreal. Are you all right? Reed asked, concern evident in his voice. Zara nodded, though tears threatened to spill. Yes, I'm just... She took a deep breath. Thank you for bringing me here. Reed's expression softened. You're safe now, Zara. Why don't you rest? I'll wake you when supper's ready. The spare room was indeed small, containing little more than a narrow bed, a simple washstand, and a chest for clothing. But the linens on the bed were clean, and sunlight streamed through a small window that overlooked the creek. Zara sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the worn quilt. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly breathe. She was safe, at least for now. As she lay down, her body practically melted into the mattress, exhaustion claiming her immediately. Her last conscious thought was of Reed's solemn vow. No one will bind you again. Zara slept deeply, without dreams, for several hours. When she woke, the light had changed, golden afternoon sun replaced by the softer hues of early evening. For a moment she didn't move, simply savoring the feeling of safety. A knock at the door roused her fully. Miss Hayes, Reed's voice. Supper's nearly ready if you're feeling up to it. Yes, she called back. I'll be out shortly. She rose and went to the washstand, where she found a pitcher of water and a clean cloth had been left for her. Gratefully, she washed away the dust of travel as best she could, wishing she had fresh clothes to change into. When she emerged, she found Reed at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. The table was set for three with simple earthenware plates and tin cups. Feel better? Reed asked, glancing up from his cooking. Much, Zara admitted, though I wish I had something clean to wear. Reed nodded. I thought of that. Asked Miguel to ride over to the Widow Parker's place about 3 miles east. She's about your size, might have something she could spare until we can get to town. He gestured to a pot on the stove. There's hot water if you want a proper wash later. I'll clear out of the house to give you privacy. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Zara deeply. Thank you. The door opened, and Miguel entered, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Senora Parker sends these with her compliments, he said, handing the package to Zara. She says to keep them, she has plenty. Zara accepted the bundle gratefully. Please thank her for me when you see her next. Miguel nodded, then moved to wash his hands at the basin by the door. Stew's ready, Reed announced. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up. They sat at the table, and Zara was surprised when both men bowed their heads. Reed spoke a simple grace, thanking God for the food and for safe travels. It was a small thing, but it revealed yet another layer to the man who had rescued her. The meal was indeed simple venison stew, cornbread, and coffee, but after days of near starvation, it tasted like the finest feast to Zara. They ate mostly in silence, though occasionally Miguel would ask Reed about his trip to Fort Laramie or comment on ranch business. After they had finished, Miguel excused himself to check on the horses one last time before retiring to his small cabin near the barn. Reed cleared the dishes, waving off Zara's offer to help. You're still recovering, he said firmly. Besides, it's my turn for dishes. Miguel and I trade off. Zara settled into one of the chairs by the fireplace, watching as Reed efficiently cleaned up from the meal. There was something oddly comforting about the domestic scene, this strong, capable man performing such an ordinary task. Reed, she said finally, I need to tell you more about Zachary Coleman. Reed dried his hands on a towel and came to sit in the chair opposite her. I'm listening. Zara took a deep breath. Coleman came to Ogden about 2 years ago. He bought the saloon first, then started buying up other businesses. My father's ranch stood in the way of his plans for the railroad spur line. She twisted her fingers together in her lap. He offered to buy the ranch, but my father refused. Our land has been in the family since before the territory was organized. And then Coleman had him killed. Reed prompted gently when she fell silent. Zara nodded. Made it look like suicide. Everyone believed it because my father had been different after my mother died 5 years ago. More withdrawn, she looked up at Reed, but I knew he would never have taken his own life. He always said suicide was a mortal sin. What proof did you have? Letters, Zara replied. Between Coleman and someone at the railroad company. They detailed the plan to acquire the land by any means necessary. I found them in Coleman's office when I was cleaning. I took work at the saloon after my father died, trying to keep our ranch going. Her voice grew bitter. Coleman caught me with the letters. That's when he had his men tie me up in that shack. Reed's expression had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. These letters, where are they now? Hidden, Zara said. I managed to hide them before Coleman caught me. They're still at my father's ranch unless Coleman's men found them. And the ranch is still yours legally? Yes. The deed is in my name now. Father transferred it to me after Mother died, said a woman needed security in this world. Tears filled her eyes. He was trying to protect me even then. Reed was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Coleman will be searching for you, he finally said. Not just because you escaped, but because you're the rightful owner of land he wants. Yes, Zara looked down at her wrists, where the marks of her captivity were still plainly visible. That's why I can't stay here long. I won't put you in danger. Where will you go? Reed asked. Cheyenne, perhaps find the territorial marshal, tell him what I know. And if Coleman's influence reaches there too, or if his men catch you before you arrive, Reed leaned forward. Zara, running alone is dangerous. Let me help you. She studied his face in the firelight. Why? Why would you risk your life for a stranger? Reed's blue eyes were steady as they met hers. Because it's the right thing to do. He hesitated, then added more softly, and because from the moment I saw those rope burns on your wrists, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Something warm unfurled in Zara's chest, a feeling almost forgotten in the days of terror and grief. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. What do you suggest? She asked. We need those letters, Reed said firmly. Without them, it's your word against a man who clearly has influence in Ogden, he thought for a moment. Tomorrow I'll ride to your ranch, see if I can find where you hid them. No, Zara shook her head. Coleman's men might be watching the place. Besides, you wouldn't know where to look. Then we'll go together, Reed countered. At night, less chance of being spotted. Zara considered this. The idea of returning to her family home both frightened and strengthened her. All right, she agreed. But we'll need to be careful. Always, Reed said with a slight smile. He stood and stoked the fire, adding another log. For now, though, you need rest. Tomorrow we'll make plans. As if on cue, Zara found herself yawning. The long day and emotional conversation had drained what little energy she had regained from her earlier sleep. The bath water should still be hot, Reed said. I'll step out, give you privacy. Thank you, Zara said, rising from her chair, for everything. Reed paused at the door, his expression solemn. I meant what I said, Zara. No one will hurt you again, not while I'm breathing. After he left, Zara allowed herself the luxury of a proper bath, washing away days of fear and grime. The clothes from the Widow Parker, a simple blue dress, and necessary underthings, were well worn but clean and fit reasonably well. As she settled into bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of night birds and the gentle murmur of the creek outside her window, Zara found herself thinking of Reed's promise. She had known him less than 2 days, yet she believed him completely when he vowed to protect her. For the first time since her father's death, Zara Hayes didn't feel entirely alone. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon, drawing Zara from a deep, restful sleep. She dressed quickly in the borrowed blue dress and made her way to the kitchen, where Reed stood at the stove, expertly flipping hot cakes. Good morning, he greeted, glancing up with a smile that transformed his serious face. Sleep well, better than I have in months, Zara admitted. Can I help with breakfast? Reed gestured toward the coffee pot. Could pour us some coffee if you're of a mind to. As Zara busied herself with the coffee, the door opened and Miguel entered, his hat in his hands. Buenos dias, he greeted them both. They settled at the table, and again Reed said a simple grace before they began eating. The food was hearty and delicious hot cakes with molasses, bacon, and eggs. Zara ate with enthusiasm, her body demanding sustenance after days of deprivation. I was thinking, Reed said as he refilled his coffee cup, about your ranch. How far is it from Ogden proper? About 5 miles southeast of town, Zara replied. It's not large, just 80 acres, but good water rights. That's what made it valuable to Coleman. Reed nodded thoughtfully. And how well do you know the surrounding area? Any neighbors you trust? Zara considered this. The Thompsons have the next ranch over, about 2 miles east. They were friends of my father. Her expression clouded. But after his death, Mr. Thompson believed the suicide story. He tried to buy our ranch, said a woman couldn't run it alone. Anyone else? The Cheyenne Reservation borders our land to the south. My father had good relations with them, traded fairly. Their chief, Running Elk, came to my father's funeral. Zara's eyes widened slightly. Actually, Running Elk questioned the suicide claim. He said my father was not a man who would choose such a path. Reed exchanged a glance with Miguel. The Cheyenne might be allies then. If Coleman's men are watching your ranch, having friends who know the land would be useful. Miguel spoke up. I have traded with the Cheyenne before. They are honorable people if shown respect. Reed pushed his empty plate aside. Zara, I've been thinking, going to your ranch at night might be safer, but it also might look suspicious if we're spotted. But a man escorting his lady friend back to her property in broad daylight, that might draw less attention. Zara frowned. Coleman's men know what I look like. True, Reed acknowledged. But they're looking for a terrified woman running alone, not one riding confidently with a man. He gestured to her borrowed dress. With a different hairstyle, perhaps a hat with a veil, you might not be recognized at a distance. Zara considered this. The idea had merit. When would we go? Tomorrow, Reed decided. Today we'll prepare. Miguel can ride to the Cheyenne and see if Running Elk will meet with us. Meanwhile, I need to go into town for supplies. What town? Zara asked sharply. Not Ogden? No, Reed reassured her. Silver Creek, small settlement about 10 miles west of here. Coleman's reach shouldn't extend there. He stood from the table. While I'm gone, you stay close to the house. Miguel will keep watch. After breakfast, Reed prepared to leave for Silver Creek, checking his rifle and pistol before saddling a fresh horse. Zara followed him to the barn, watching as he efficiently secured his saddlebags. "Be careful," she said softly. Reed paused in his work, turning to face her. The morning sunlight streaming through the barn door illuminated his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the kindness in his blue eyes. "Always am," he replied with a slight smile. "Don't worry, Silver Creek is safe enough. I'll be back by sundown." Zara nodded, though anxiety still churned in her stomach. The thought of Reed leaving, even temporarily, made her realize how quickly she had come to depend on his presence. "While I'm gone," Reed continued, "maybe you could look through that chest in your room. There are some of my mother's things in there that might fit you. She was about your size." "Your mother?" Zara asked, surprised. "Does she?" "She passed on 10 years ago," Reed said quietly. "Consumption. Those things are all I have left of her, but she would have wanted them used, not just stored away gathering dust." Touched by the gesture, Zara nodded. "I'll take good care of anything I borrow." Reed mounted his horse, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. "Miguel should be back by midday. Until then, stay close to the house. There's a loaded shotgun over the fireplace if you need it." With that, he tipped his hat and rode out, leaving Zara standing in the yard watching until horse and rider disappeared over the rise. The day passed slowly. Zara explored the small house, noting the simple but comfortable furnishings. Reed clearly valued function over ornamentation, but there were touches that spoke of a home rather than merely a shelter. A handmade quilt draped over the sofa, shelves of well-read books, a carved wooden box on the mantel. In the spare room, she found the chest Reed had mentioned. Inside were neatly folded women's garments, dresses, shawls, and underthings from a decade past but still serviceable. She selected a green calico day dress that seemed close to her size, along with necessary undergarments. As she held the dress up, Zara noticed a small photograph tucked into the chest's lid. It showed a handsome young couple, the woman seated, the man standing with his hand on her shoulder. The woman's face was gentle, with the same striking blue eyes Reed had inherited. The man was clearly Reed's father, with the same strong jawline and broad shoulders. Carefully, Zara replaced the photograph. It felt like an intrusion to study these private mementos too closely. By midday, she had washed and mended the green dress, grateful for the sewing kit she had found in the chest. The work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, preventing her from dwelling too much on the dangers that still threatened. Miguel returned shortly after noon, his expression grave. "The Cheyenne will help," he reported as Zara met him in the yard. "Running Elk remembers your father with respect. He says the land was stolen with lies and such dishonor cannot stand." Relief washed through Zara. "When will we meet him?" "Tomorrow, before you and Senor Reed leave for your ranch. He will send 2 of his best men to watch the trails, ensure no one follows you." Miguel hesitated. "Running Elk also said Coleman's men have been to the reservation asking questions about you. They offered payment for information." Zara's heart sank. "Did anyone tell them anything?" Miguel smiled slightly. "The Cheyenne have no love for men like Coleman. They told him nothing, but it is good to know he searches in many directions." The remainder of the afternoon passed quietly. Zara prepared a simple supper, finding comfort in the domestic task. As the sun began to set, she found herself repeatedly glancing out the window, watching for Reed's return. Just as the last light faded from the sky, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her as Reed rode into the yard, his tall figure unmistakable even in the gathering dusk. He entered the house carrying several packages, the scent of the outdoors, pine and horse and leather accompanying him. "Something smells good," he commented, setting his bundles on the table. "Just a simple stew," Zara replied, surprised by how pleased she felt at his approval. "How was your trip to Silver Creek? Productive?" Reed removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Got everything we need, plus some extra ammunition. Also picked up some gossip. Seems Coleman's men have been asking questions in Silver Creek too. They're casting a wide net." Zara's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Did anyone recognize you or connect you to me?" "No," Reed assured her. "I'm not known there well enough for anyone to think twice about my business." He nodded toward the stove. "Is that ready? I'm hungry enough to eat a bear." They sat down to eat, joined shortly by Miguel. Over the meal, they discussed their plans for the next day: the meeting with Running Elk, the journey to Zara's ranch, what to do if they encountered trouble. "The letters," Zara explained, "are hidden in a loose floorboard beneath my bed. Unless Coleman's men tore up the place completely, they should still be there." Reed nodded. "Once we have them, we don't return here immediately. Too risky to lead anyone back to the ranch. We'll head west toward the mountains, then circle back once we're sure we're not followed." After supper, Miguel retired to his cabin, leaving Reed and Zara alone by the fire. A comfortable silence settled between them as Reed cleaned his pistol, and Zara darned a small hole in the sleeve of her borrowed dress. "That was my mother's favorite," Reed said suddenly, nodding toward the green calico. "She wore it to church every Sunday in summer." Zara's fingers stilled on the fabric. "I hope you don't mind. I can wear something else if." "No," Reed interrupted gently. "It suits you." "Ma would have liked seeing it worn again." He set his pistol aside, his expression thoughtful. "She was a lot like you, actually. Strong, determined." "Tell me about her," Zara requested softly. Reed settled back in his chair, his face softening with memory. "She came out here as a bride, just 19 years old. My pa had a claim, but not much else. She learned to shoot, to garden in impossible soil, to doctor both people and animals." A smile touched his lips. "And she could make a meal out of nearly nothing, like you did tonight. You must miss her." "Every day," Reed admitted. "But she taught me everything important: how to be honest, how to work hard, how to treat people right." He looked at Zara directly. "She'd have liked you." The simple statement warmed Zara deeply. "I think I would have liked her too." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, intimate, comfortable. Zara found herself studying Reed's profile in the firelight, appreciating the straight nose, the firm mouth that could soften so unexpectedly into a smile, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun. He was handsome, she realized with a small start. Not in the flashy way of some men, but in a solid, reassuring manner that spoke of reliability and strength. As if sensing her gaze, Reed looked up, catching her eyes with his. For a moment, something passed between them, an awareness, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then Reed cleared his throat and stood. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day," Zara nodded, setting aside her mending. "Yes, of course." "Good night, Zara," Reed said, his voice gentler than she had yet heard it. "Good night, Reed," she replied, surprised by the slight tremor in her own voice. In her room, Zara prepared for bed, her thoughts a confusing whirl. In the midst of danger and fear, she found herself thinking not of Coleman or the letters or her uncertain future, but of Reed Calloway's blue eyes in the firelight. Morning arrived with a chill in the air and a thin layer of frost on the grass. Zara dressed in the green calico, arranging her hair differently than she usually wore it, pulled back severely and pinned at the nape of her neck. The style aged her slightly, changing the appearance of her face. When she emerged from her room, Reed was already at the table, studying a rough map drawn on a piece of paper. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her self-conscious. "Will this do?" she asked, gesturing to her altered appearance. Reed nodded slowly. "Yes, it's good." He seemed to catch himself and looked back down at the map. "Miguel's gone to meet Running Elk. They'll meet us at the creek crossing a mile east of here." Breakfast was a quiet, tense affair. Both of them felt the weight of the day ahead, the risks they were preparing to take. When they finished eating, Reed collected the dishes while Zara packed a small bundle of food for their journey. "If something goes wrong," Reed said as he checked his pistol one final time, "if we get separated, head west into the mountains. There's an old trapper's cabin about 15 miles in, near a waterfall. Miguel knows it. He'll find you." Zara nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Nothing will go wrong." Reed holstered his pistol and looked at her directly. "Zara, I need you to promise me something. If there's trouble, if I tell you to run, you do it. Don't wait, don't argue, just run." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I promise," she said softly, "but you must promise me the same. I couldn't bear it if you were hurt because of me." Something flickered in Reed's expression, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. "I promise," he finally said. "Now let's get moving. Daylight's wasting." They rode out, Zara on a gentle mare named Daisy while Reed rode his stallion, Jupiter. The morning was clear and crisp, the Wyoming landscape stretching endlessly around them. Under different circumstances, Zara might have enjoyed the ride, the beauty of the plains, the companionship of the tall cowboy riding beside her. As promised, Miguel and Running Elk waited at the creek crossing. The Cheyenne chief was an imposing figure, his weathered face dignified beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had clearly seen many seasons. Two younger men accompanied him, their expressions watchful. Running Elk dismounted when he saw them approach, waiting silently as Reed and Zara brought their horses to a halt before him. "Chief Running Elk," Zara greeted him respectfully. "Thank you for coming." The chief studied her face. "Daughter of Thomas Hayes," he acknowledged. "Your father was a man of honor. His death was no self-choice." "No," Zara agreed. "It was murder." Running Elk nodded once sharply. "The man Coleman sends his hunters everywhere. They offered gold for knowledge of you." His expression hardened. "The Cheyenne do not sell truth for gold." "We need to reach Zara's ranch," Reed explained. "Retrieve proof of Coleman's crimes." Running Elk turned his gaze to Reed, assessing him with keen, dark eyes. "You are the one called Calloway. Miguel speaks well of you." Reed nodded respectfully. "I'm honored by your help, Chief Running Elk." The chief gestured to the two men with him. "Swift Arrow and Black Wolf will ride ahead, watch the trails. If Coleman's men are near, they will signal." He looked back at Zara. "When you have your proof, bring it to our council. The Cheyenne will stand as witness to Coleman's lies." "Thank you," Zara said, deeply moved by the offer. Running Elk mounted his horse. "Justice must come, even to the white man's world. Coleman's greed threatens all who live on this land." With that, he signaled to his companions, and the three Cheyenne rode off, Swift Arrow and Black Wolf taking a different path that would lead them toward Ogden. Miguel approached Reed. "I will return to the ranch. Keep watch there." Reed clasped the other man's shoulder. "Be careful, amigo." "If we're not back by tomorrow sundown, I will come looking," Miguel finished. "Vea con Dios, my friends." As Miguel rode back toward Calloway Ranch, Reed turned to Zara. "Ready?" She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "Ready." They rode east, following a path that would take them around the northern edge of Ogden and approach Zara's ranch from the opposite direction. The journey would be longer this way, but less likely to be watched by Coleman's men. As they rode, Reed kept up a steady conversation, instructing Zara on their cover story should they be stopped or questioned. "We're cousins," he explained. "You're visiting from Denver. We're riding to your property to assess it for possible sale." "Cousins?" Zara repeated, raising an eyebrow. Reed's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Would you prefer I say you're my wife? Might raise questions about why I never mentioned a wife before." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Cousins is fine," she said quickly. The sun climbed higher as they rode, warming the chill from the air. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of bread and dried beef. Reed remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. "Tell me about your ranch," he said as they remounted to continue their journey. "What was it like growing up there?" Zara smiled at the memories. "Beautiful, wild. My father built the house when he married my mother. It was just one room at first, but he added to it over the years." Her expression grew wistful. "We had horses I learned to ride almost before I could walk. And the creek that runs through the property, it has the sweetest water you've ever tasted." "Sounds like paradise," Reed commented. "It was," Zara agreed softly, "until Coleman came." They rode in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually became more familiar to Zara, the particular shape of distant hills, the pattern of trees along a creek bed. They were nearing her home. Late afternoon found them approaching the Hayes Ranch from the north. Reed halted their horses in a stand of trees that offered a view of the property below. The modest house sat near a bend in the creek, with a small barn and corral nearby. The fields beyond showed signs of neglect. It had been months since anyone had tended them properly. "Looks quiet," Reed observed, studying the place through a small spyglass. "No horses in the corral, no smoke from the chimney. Coleman would have no reason to keep men here permanently," Zara said. "The deed is in my name, but he likely believes I'm long gone or dead." Her voice caught slightly on the last word. Reed lowered the spyglass, his expression grim. "Let's hope he keeps believing that. We'll wait until dusk, then approach from the creek side, less visible that way." They waited as the sun sank toward the horizon, its light turning golden across the plains. Zara felt a complex mix of emotions as she gazed down at her childhood home, grief for her father, anger at what had been taken from her, and a strange, bittersweet nostalgia for the life she had once known there. "You could rebuild it, you know," Reed said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Once Coleman is dealt with, the land is still yours." Zara looked at him, surprised by the suggestion. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "I've been so focused on surviving, on getting justice for my father." Reed nodded, understanding. "One step at a time, then. First the letters, then Coleman, then you decide what comes next." As dusk deepened into early evening, they led their horses down toward the creek, following its winding path to approach the house from behind. No lamps shone in the windows. No sounds disturbed the quiet except for the gentle murmur of the water and the occasional call of a night bird. They tied the horses in a small grove of cottonwoods behind the house, then moved cautiously toward the back door. Zara's heart pounded as Reed tried the handle. It turned easily. The house had been left unlocked. "Stay behind me," Reed whispered, drawing his pistol as he eased the door open. The interior was dark and smelled of disused dust and abandonment. Zara followed Reed inside, her eyes gradually adjusting to the gloom. The kitchen was much as she remembered it, though cupboard doors stood open, their contents disturbed. "They searched the place," she whispered. Reed nodded. "Which room is yours?" "This way." They moved through the house silently, Reed checking each room before allowing Zara to follow. The front parlor showed more signs of searching, drawers pulled out, furniture moved from its usual positions. Zara's bedroom was at the back of the house, a small space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. Here, too, evidence of searching was apparent, the mattress askew, dresser drawers hanging open. "Under the bed," Zara whispered, kneeling beside it. "The third floorboard from the wall." Reed stood watch at the door as Zara reached under the bed, feeling for the loose board. Her fingers found the familiar gap and she pried the board up, reaching into the small cavity beneath. For a heart-stopping moment, she felt nothing. Then her fingers touched paper. Relief flooding through her, Zara withdrew a small oilskin packet. "I have them," she whispered triumphantly, holding up the packet. Reed's tense posture relaxed slightly. "Good, let's get out of here." As they turned to leave, a noise from the front of the house froze them in place, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Reed moved instantly, pushing Zara behind him as he raised his pistol. He gestured toward the window, mouthing silently, "Go now." Zara shook her head, clutching the precious letters. She wouldn't leave him. Footsteps sounded in the hall, accompanied by a man's voice. "Check all the rooms. Coleman wants to be sure." Reed's expression hardened. He gestured more urgently toward the window. When Zara still hesitated, he whispered, so softly she barely heard it, "You promised." The reminder of her earlier promise to run if he told her to struck her like a physical blow. She had given her word. With a last, anguished look at Reed, Zara moved silently to the window and eased it open. The drop to the ground was short, and she landed softly in the grass below. Crouching beneath the windowsill, she hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the desire to know what was happening inside. From within the house came the sudden, explosive sound of Reed's pistol firing, followed by shouts and more gunfire. Zara's heart leaped into her throat. She had to help him, but how? She had no weapon, and the letters in her hand were their only hope for justice. The back door burst open, and Reed emerged at a run, firing once more over his shoulder. "Run!" he shouted when he saw her still crouched by the window. "To the horses!" They fled together toward the cottonwood grove, bullets splintering bark around them as Coleman's men pursued. Reed returned fire, the report of his pistol echoing across the darkening land. They reached the horses, quickly untying them and swinging into the saddles. "Ride," Reed commanded, spurring Jupiter forward. "Follow the creek west," Zara obeyed, urging Daisy into a gallop alongside Jupiter. Behind them, shouts and the sound of horses being mounted told them the pursuit was not over. They rode hard along the creek bed, using the deepening darkness and the trees for cover. Reed led them up a rocky slope, then doubled back across the creek, a maneuver designed to confuse their pursuers. "Are you hit?" Zara called anxiously, noticing Reed's stiff posture in the saddle. "Just a graze," he replied tersely. "Keep riding." They pushed on through the night, gradually leaving the sounds of pursuit behind. Reed set a punishing pace, clearly intent on putting as much distance between them and Coleman's men as possible. It was well past midnight when he finally signaled a halt. They had reached a heavily wooded area where the creek widened into a small pond. Exhausted and breathless, Zara dismounted, her legs trembling beneath her. "I think we lost them," Reed said, his voice tight with pain as he slid from his saddle in the pale moonlight. Zara could see the dark stain on his left sleeve. "You're hurt worse than a graze," she accused, moving quickly to his side. Reed grimaced. "Bullet caught me as we were leaving, it's not too deep." Zara helped him to a fallen log, then retrieved his canteen. "Let me see." Reluctantly, Reed allowed her to examine the wound. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his upper arm. It was bleeding steadily but had missed any major vessels. "We need to clean and bind this," Zara said, tearing a strip from her petticoat. Reed watched as she worked, his face pale in the moonlight. "Do you still have the letters?" Zara patted the front of her dress where she had tucked the oilskin packet. "Safe. Did you recognize any of the men?" "One of them," Reed confirmed. "He was in Silver Creek yesterday asking questions. They must have been watching your ranch, waiting to see if you'd return." Zara's hands stilled on the makeshift bandage. "I'm so sorry, Reed. This is my fault." "No," he said firmly, catching her wrist with his good hand. "None of this is your fault. The only one to blame is Coleman." Their eyes met in the darkness, and again Zara felt that strange connection, that sense of understanding that went beyond words. Reed's grip on her wrist gentled, his thumb brushing lightly over her pulse point. "We should rest for a few hours," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Then head west at first light. The mountains will give us better cover." They made a small camp, not daring to light a fire. Sharing Reed's bedroll and a single blanket, they huddled together for warmth. Despite her exhaustion, Zara found sleep elusive. The events of the day replayed in her mind: the gunfire, the desperate flight, the feel of Reed's blood on her hands as she bandaged his wound. And underneath it all, a growing awareness of the man beside her. His solid presence, his unwavering protection, the way he had looked at her in the moonlight. "Reed," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. "Thank you for everything." He stirred beside her, his voice coming soft in the darkness. "No need for thanks, just doing what's right." "It's more than that," Zara insisted. "You've risked everything for me, a woman you barely know." Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "I'm starting to feel like I've known you a lot longer than a few days." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through Zara's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with their shared blanket. "I feel the same," she admitted. In the darkness, Reed's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. They said nothing more, but as Zara finally drifted toward sleep, their joined hands seemed to speak volumes. Dawn found them already on the move, heading west toward the distant mountains. Reed's wound had stiffened overnight, but he rode without complaint, his face set in determined lines. Zara watched him worriedly, noting the pallor beneath his tan and the way he favored his injured arm. They rode steadily through the morning, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some of their dwindling provisions. The landscape had changed, becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills. Pine forests replaced the open plains, offering better concealment but more difficult terrain. "How much farther to the trapper's cabin you mentioned?" Zara asked as they prepared to continue. Reed squinted at the mountains ahead. "Another few hours if we keep a good pace. It's high up near a waterfall, and you're sure it will be safe?" "Safe enough," Reed replied. "It's remote, hard to find if you don't know where to look. And Miguel will come looking for us there if we don't return to the ranch." They mounted up and continued their journey. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the air grew cooler and the forest denser. Game trails provided their path now, winding between towering pines and across small, rushing streams. Late afternoon brought them to a narrow valley, where a waterfall tumbled down a rocky cliff into a clear pool below. Nestled among the trees near the pool stood a small, sturdy cabin, its logs weathered by many seasons. "There it is," Reed said, pointing, "old Jeb Mason's place. He trapped these mountains for 30 years before heading to California for the gold rush. Never came back." They approached cautiously, but the cabin appeared deserted. Reed dismounted stiffly, drawing his pistol as he moved toward the door. Zara followed, her nerves taut with apprehension. The interior of the cabin was simple one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chair, and a platform bed built into one wall. Dust covered everything, but otherwise, the place seemed sound. "We can stay here tonight," Reed decided, holstering his pistol. "Maybe longer, depending on how things look tomorrow." Zara moved to the small window, looking out at the peaceful valley. "It's beautiful here," she commented. "So different from the plains." Reed had begun gathering wood for a fire, but he paused to join her at the window. "My grandfather trapped these mountains," he said. "Told me stories about them when I was a boy, always wanted to see them for myself." "And now you have," Zara said, turning to look at him. Reed's blue eyes met hers, a smile touching his lips despite his obvious fatigue and pain. "Now I have." For a moment, they stood there, close enough that Zara could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Something was building between them, something neither had put into words, but both increasingly felt. Reed broke the moment first, clearing his throat and turning back to the fireplace. "We should get a fire going before dark. Nights are cold up here." While Reed built the fire, Zara explored the small cabin. In a trunk beneath the bed, she found some preserved foodstuffs, jerky, beans, and coffee clearly left by the cabin's previous occupant but still usable. A small stream ran behind the cabin, providing fresh water. By the time darkness fell, they had a cheerful fire burning in the fireplace and a simple stew cooking in a pot they'd found hanging by the chimney. Reed sat at the table, carefully examining the letters Zara had retrieved from her ranch. "These are damning," he said, looking up from the papers. "Coleman explicitly discusses bribing officials and removing obstacles, including your father. With these, the territorial marshal would have to act." Zara stirred the stew, taking comfort in the domestic task. "If we can reach him." "Coleman clearly has influence beyond Ogden." "We'll reach him," Reed assured her. "Once Miguel realizes we didn't return to the ranch, he'll come looking. With his help and running elks, we can get these letters to the right people." They ate their simple meal in companionable silence, both weary from the long day's ride and the tension of their escape. Afterward, Reed insisted on checking the horses one last time before retiring, despite his injured arm. When he returned, he found Zara had made up the bed with the blankets from their saddlebags and the relatively clean bedding they'd found in the cabin. She stood awkwardly beside it. "I can sleep by the fire," Reed offered, noting her discomfort. Zara shook her head. "Don't be foolish. It's cold and you're injured. The bed is big enough for both of us." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Besides, I've grown used to your presence beside me." Something flickered in Reed's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Zara's breath catch. "If you're sure," he said, "I am." They settled onto the bed, more comfortable with the shared proximity than either might have expected a few days earlier. The fire cast a warm, golden glow over the small cabin, and outside, the sound of the waterfall provided a soothing background. "Reed," Zara said after they had lain in silence for a time, "what will you do after this is over, after Coleman is brought to justice?" Reed was quiet for a moment, considering. "Go back to my ranch, tend my cattle, live my life." He turned his head to look at her. "What about you?" Zara stared up at the rough-hewn ceiling. "I don't know, my father's ranch. It holds so many memories now, both good and painful. I'm not sure I could live there alone." "You could sell it," Reed suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." "Perhaps." Zara was silent for a moment, then added softly, "Or perhaps not alone." The implication hung in the air between them. Reed shifted onto his side, facing her despite the pain it clearly caused his injured arm. "Zara," he began, his voice low and serious. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but a sound from outside interrupted him, the distant but unmistakable crack of a breaking branch. Both froze, instantly alert. Reed was on his feet in a second, moving silently to the window. Zara followed, her heart pounding. In the moonlight, they could make out movement among the trees at the edge of the clearing. "Could be an animal," Zara whispered hopefully. Reed shook his head. "Too deliberate." He reached for his pistol. "Stay here?" "No," Zara caught his arm. "We stay together." Before Reed could argue, the cabin door burst open. Two men stood in the doorway, pistols raised. Zara recognized one of them, Bill Hansen, one of Coleman's most loyal men. "Well, well," Hansen drawled, his thin face twisted in a cruel smile. Look what we found, boys. Coleman's gonna be right pleased. Reed had pushed Zara behind him, his own pistol aimed steadily at the intruders. You're trespassing, he said calmly. I suggest you leave. Hansen laughed. Don't think so, Cowboy. We're here for the girl and whatever she took from the Hayes place. His eyes narrowed. Drop the gun or I put a bullet between your eyes right now. The standoff stretched for a tense moment. Then slowly Reed lowered his pistol. Smart move, Hansen smirked. Now, Miss Hayes, why don't you hand over those letters you took? Save us all a lot of trouble. Zara stepped out from behind Reed, her chin raised defiantly. I don't have them anymore. Hansen's expression darkened. Don't lie to me, girl. We know you took something from under the floorboards. I had them, Zara admitted. But we sent them on to the territorial marshal this morning with a Cheyenne rider. It was a desperate bluff, but the flash of uncertainty in Hansen's eyes suggested it might be working. You're lying, he snarled, but with less conviction. Reed picked up the thread seamlessly. Why do you think we came up here? To hide while the letters made their way to Cheyenne. By now, they're probably already in the marshal's hands. Hansen's companion shifted uneasily. Bill, if that's true, shut up, Hansen barked. His eyes darted between Reed and Zara, calculating. Even if that's true, Coleman will want the girl. Insurance, like. Reed took a small step forward. She's not going anywhere with you. Hansen's pistol swung toward Reed's chest. You ain't in a position to make demands, Cowboy. What happened next occurred so quickly that Zara could barely follow it. Reed suddenly lunged forward, knocking Hansen's pistol aside as it discharged, the bullet splintering wood near the fireplace. In the same motion, Reed's fist connected with Hansen's jaw, sending him staggering backward. The second man raised his pistol, but Zara, acting on pure instinct, grabbed the heavy iron pot from the fire and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the man's head with a dull thud, and he crumpled to the floor. Hansen recovered quickly, launching himself at Reed. The two men crashed into the table, sending the letters scattering across the floor. They grappled fiercely, Hansen's greater weight nearly offsetting Reed's height advantage. Reed's injured arm clearly hampered him, and blood began to seep through his bandage as the wound reopened. Zara scrambled to retrieve Reed's fallen pistol. Her fingers had just closed around it when a boot stomped on her hand, drawing a cry of pain from her lips. Looking up, she saw a third man had entered the cabin, his weathered face cruel beneath his hat. Now, he chided, grinding his heel against her fingers. Ladies shouldn't play with guns. Reed roared with fury at Zara's cry, summoning a surge of strength that allowed him to throw Hansen off. He whirled to face the new threat, but Hansen tackled him from behind and both men crashed to the floor again. The third man yanked Zara to her feet by her hair, causing tears of pain to spring to her eyes. Coleman's gonna be real happy to see you, Miss Hayes, he growled. Been driven him crazy knowing you was out there with what you know. Let her go, Reed shouted, still struggling with Hansen. The man laughed, dragging Zara toward the door. Or what, Cowboy? You'll be dead in about 2 minutes, way I see it. As they reached the doorway, a new sound cut through the night, the thunderous report of a rifle, followed immediately by the third man's cry of pain as he released Zara and clutched his shoulder. Or that could happen, came Miguel's calm voice from the darkness. Relief flooded through Zara as Miguel stepped into view, his rifle aimed steadily at the wounded man. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows, Swift Arrow and Black Wolf. Both with bows drawn and arrows nocked, inside the cabin, Reed had finally gained the advantage over Hansen. With a powerful blow, he knocked the man unconscious, then staggered to his feet, breathing heavily. Miguel, he gasped. Your timing is impeccable, amigo. Miguel shrugged, his eyes never leaving the wounded man at his feet. You did not return, I worried. He gestured to the Cheyenne warriors. Running Elk sent them to find Coleman's men. They found me instead, and together we tracked you here. Swift Arrow spoke in careful English. 2 more men at the foot of the valley. We tied them to trees. Reed moved to Zara's side, his hand gentle on her arm. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though her hand throbbed where the man had stomped on it. I'm fine. Your arm is bleeding again. It can wait, Reed said, turning to Miguel. We need to secure these men, then get the letters to safety. The next hour was a blur of activity. The unconscious Hansen and his companion were bound securely, as was the wounded third man after Miguel had roughly bandaged his shoulder. The letters were carefully gathered and returned to their oilskin packet. What now? Zara asked as they stood in the cabin doorway, watching Swift Arrow and Black Wolf drag the bound men toward the horses. Reed looked at Miguel. Coleman will have more men searching. We need to split up, make it harder for them to catch all of us. Miguel nodded. I will take the letters to Cheyenne to the marshal. The Cheyenne will ensure I arrive safely. He looked at Reed's bloodied sleeve. You should rest, Heel. The old Weston mine would be a good place abandoned, but the cabin there is sound. Reed considered this, then nodded. Good idea. It's not far from here and few know of it. He turned to Zara. It means a few more days in hiding. Are you willing? Zara met his gaze steadily. As long as we're together, I'm willing. Something flickered in Reed's eyes, a warmth, a promise. Together, he agreed softly. They parted ways at dawn, Miguel and the Cheyenne warriors heading east with the precious letters and their prisoners, while Reed and Zara rode deeper into the mountains toward the abandoned mine Miguel had mentioned. The mine itself had been played out years earlier, but the miner's cabin remained, tucked into a small, sheltered valley beside a clear stream. Like the trapper's cabin, it was simple, one room with a fireplace and basic furnishings, but it would serve as a safe haven while they waited for news. Reed's arm had begun to worry Zara. The wound was inflamed and he had developed a slight fever during their ride to the mine. Once they had secured the cabin, she insisted on treating it properly. Sit, she commanded, pointing to the cabin's single chair. I need to clean that wound. Too exhausted to argue, Reed complied. Zara worked gently but thoroughly, cleaning the wound with water boiled over the fire and applying a poultice made from herbs she had found growing near the stream, skills learned from her mother years ago. You're good at this, Reed commented, watching her work with half-closed eyes. My mother taught me, Zara replied, carefully wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. She believed a woman should know how to tend wounds, deliver babies, and shoot straight. A small smile curved Reed's lips. Sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Zara secured the bandage, then laid a cool cloth on Reed's forehead. Now rest. The fever should break by morning if we're lucky. Reed caught her hand as she pulled away, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Thank you, Zara. Not just for this, for everything. Your courage, your determination. Not many would have faced what you have with such strength. The simple sincerity in his voice touched Zara deeply. I could say the same of you, she replied softly. You've risked everything for me, a woman you barely knew. I know you now, Reed said, his blue eyes intent despite his fever. And what I know, I admire greatly. Zara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. To cover her sudden emotion, she busied herself with preparing a simple meal from the supplies Miguel had provided. Behind her, she heard Reed shift in the chair, settling more comfortably as the herbs in the poultice began to ease his pain. The next few days passed in a strange, peaceful interlude. Outside their small valley, they knew men were searching for them. Danger still threatened. But within their sheltered haven, a deeper connection grew between them. Reed's fever broke on the second night, and his strength began to return. They settled into a simple routine, gathering food, tending the small fire, talking for hours as daylight faded into evening. Reed told Zara stories of his childhood, of cattle drives and the building of his ranch. Zara shared memories of her parents, of the dreams she'd had before tragedy struck. On the third evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, Reed turned to Zara with unexpected seriousness. When this is over, he said, what do you want, Zara, truly want for your life? She considered the question carefully. Peace, she finally answered. A home, perhaps a family someday, she looked at him shyly. What about you? Reed's gaze was steady, his blue eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. Much the same, my ranch is a good place, but it's lonely sometimes. I've been thinking it needs a woman's touch. He took a breath. Your touch, if you were willing. Zara's heart quickened. Reed, are you? I know it's fast, he interrupted gently. I know we've known each other less than a week, but sometimes out here life moves at its own pace. He reached for her hand. I'm not asking for promises right now. Just asking you to consider it when all this is done. Zara looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, her smaller but no less strong for what she had endured. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with emotion. "I don't need time to consider it," she said softly. "My heart already knows its answer." Reed's expression transformed, hope and joy replacing uncertainty. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "Zara Hayes," he whispered, "from the moment I saw those rope burns on your wrists, I knew I would do anything to protect you. What I didn't expect was how quickly you would come to matter to me." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first night by the campfire." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, not tears of grief or fear, but of a joy she had never expected to feel again. "And I with you," she admitted. "You saw me at my worst, frightened, desperate, and still you treated me with dignity and respect." She leaned into his touch. "How could I not love you for that?" The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration. Then, as mutual desire flared between them, it deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Reed rested his forehead against hers once more. "When this is over," he promised, "no one will ever hurt you again. No one will bind you again in any way. With me, you'll always be free to choose your own path." "I choose you," Zara whispered. "I choose us." They might have continued, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats suddenly cut through the evening quiet. Instantly alert, Reed reached for his pistol, positioning himself between Zara and the potential threat. "Inside," he ordered quietly. "Be ready to run if needed." But as the rider came into view, they both relaxed. It was Miguel, his familiar figure unmistakable even in the fading light. "Miguel." Reed called, stepping forward to meet his friend. "What news?" Miguel dismounted, his expression serious but not grim. "The marshal has the letters," he reported. "He's issued warrants for Coleman and his men. A posse rode for Ogden yesterday." Relief washed over Zara. "Then it's over." Miguel hesitated. "Not quite. Coleman heard about the warrants somehow. He's fled Ogden, heading north with a few of his most loyal men." Reed's jaw tightened. "So he's escaped justice." "For now," Miguel agreed, "but the marshal has telegraphed descriptions to every town in the territory. Coleman's face is known now. He won't get far." He looked at Zara. "The marshal wants to speak with you to hear your testimony, but he says the letters alone are enough to convict Coleman when he's caught." Zara nodded, a complex mix of emotions washing through her. Relief that her father would be vindicated, disappointment that Coleman had temporarily escaped, and uncertainty about what would come next. Reed seemed to sense her turmoil. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. "It's a start," he said. "Justice may be slow, but it will come." Miguel watched their joined hands with a small smile. "The marshal also said the Hayes property remains legally yours, Señorita Zara. You can return whenever you wish." Zara looked up at Reed, a question in her eyes. He answered it with a smile that warmed her to her core. "Home," he said softly. "We can go home." The return journey to Calloway Ranch took 2 days, during which Miguel filled them in on all that had transpired in their absence. The territorial marshal, a no-nonsense former Army officer named Grant, had acted swiftly upon receiving the letters. Coleman's corruption had apparently extended further than even Zara had known, involving bribes to local officials and threats against anyone who opposed his plans for the railroad spur. "The sheriff of Ogden has been arrested," Miguel reported, "and the mayor too. Many are talking now, hoping for leniency." "And my father's name?" Zara asked. "Has it been cleared?" Miguel nodded solemnly. "The marshal has declared officially that Thomas Hayes was murdered. There will be a notice in the territorial papers." Tears stung Zara's eyes at this news. Her father's good name would be restored. It wouldn't bring him back, but it meant something nonetheless. They reached Calloway Ranch on the afternoon of the second day. As they rode into the yard, Zara felt a curious sense of homecoming, though she had spent less than 2 days here before their journey to retrieve the letters. In the days that followed, Zara rode with Reed to Cheyenne to give her formal statement to Marshal Grant. The older man listened gravely to her account, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never doubting her testimony. "Coleman won't get far," he assured them as the interview concluded. "We've got descriptions out all the way to Canada. He shows his face anywhere in the territory, we'll hear of it." Reed nodded. "And when you catch him, he'll hang," the marshal said bluntly. "For murder, corruption, and a dozen other crimes we're still uncovering." He looked at Zara. Miss Hayes, your courage in bringing this to light is commendable. Your father would be proud. Back at Calloway Ranch, life settled into a new rhythm. Zara found herself fitting naturally into the daily routines, helping with meals, learning the workings of the ranch, even assisting with the cattle when an extra hand was needed. In the evenings, she and Reed would sit by the fire, talking of the future. Sometimes Miguel would join them, bringing his guitar to play soft melodies as the night deepened around the small house. I should visit my father's grave, Zara said one evening, 3 weeks after their return. I never had the chance to say goodbye properly. Reed nodded, understanding. We could ride there tomorrow, if you like. It's time I paid my respects to the man who raised such a remarkable daughter. The following day found them at the small cemetery outside Ogden. Thomas Hayes' grave was simple, a wooden cross bearing his name and dates. Zara knelt beside it, placing the wildflowers she had gathered that morning against the weathered wood. "Hello, Father," she said softly. "I've brought someone to meet you, someone important to me." Reed stood respectfully a few paces back, hat in hand, giving Zara the privacy of this moment with her father. When she finally rose and turned to him, her eyes were damp but peaceful. "He would have liked you," she said, taking Reed's offered hand. "He always said character was what mattered most in a man." Reed squeezed her hand gently. "I wish I could have known him." They rode next to the Hayes Ranch. It stood empty still, though Marshal Grant had assured Zara it remained legally hers. The house looked smaller somehow than Zara remembered, more fragile against the vast Wyoming landscape. "We could rebuild it," Reed said, echoing his words from days earlier, "if that's what you want." Zara surveyed the property, the fields where she had played as a child, the creek where she had learned to swim, the house her father had built with his own hands. Memories, both sweet and painful, filled every corner. "No," she said finally. "Too many ghosts. I'd rather start fresh." She turned to Reed. "But I don't want to sell it either, not yet." Reed nodded, understanding. "It will wait, land is patient." As they prepared to leave, Zara took one last look at her childhood home. "Goodbye, Father," she whispered to the wind. "I'll make you proud." Reed's arm slipped around her waist, strong and supportive. "You already have," he murmured. They rode back to Calloway Ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Neither spoke much, both lost in thoughts of the past and dreams of the future. That evening after supper, Reed took Zara's hand. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her to a small rise behind the house where a single cottonwood tree stood sentinel. From this vantage point, the entire ranch spread before them: the house, the barn, the corrals, and beyond them the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "My father brought my mother to this spot when he first brought her to the ranch," Reed said, his voice soft with memory. "He told her that everything she could see would be theirs to build together." He turned to face Zara, taking both her hands in his. "I want to build a life with you, Zara Hayes. Here if you'll have it, and me." Zara's heart swelled with emotion. "Are you proposing, Reed Calloway?" A smile broke across his face, transforming it with boyish charm. "I believe I am, though I'm making a poor job of it." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Zara Hayes, will you marry me? Share my home, my name, my life?" Joy bubbled up within Zara, bright and pure. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Reed stood, gathering her into his arms. The kiss they shared was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love that had grown quickly but would endure. "No one will ever bind you again," Reed whispered against her hair. "With me, you'll always be free." Zara nestled closer into his embrace, feeling truly safe for the first time since her father's death. "My heart has chosen its home," she replied, "and it's with you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Calloway Ranch. Miguel stood as Reed's best man, while the widow Parker, who had become a friend to Zara, stood as her matron of honor. Running Elk attended with several members of his tribe, honoring the alliance that had helped bring Coleman's crimes to light. Marshal Grant came as well, bringing news that Zachary Coleman had been captured trying to cross into Canada. He would stand trial in Cheyenne the following month, with the evidence virtually guaranteeing his conviction. "Justice comes," Running Elk said to Zara after the ceremony. "For your father, for the land. The balance returns." Zara nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in the chief's words. "Thank you for your help. My husband and I won't forget it." Running Elk's weathered face creased in a rare smile at the word husband. "You have chosen well," he said, glancing toward Reed. "He is a man of honor like your father." As the celebration continued around them, Reed found Zara standing alone for a moment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Zara leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Reed turned her to face him, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "I made you a promise the night we met," he said. "No one will bind you again. I want you to know that includes me. You'll always be free to make your own choices in our marriage." Zara reached up to touch his face, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow. "I choose you," she said simply. "Every day I will choose you." Their kiss was a seal on that promise, tender yet passionate, a beginning rather than an ending. 2 years later, Zara stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Reed rode in from the north pasture. Their son, Thomas, named for her father, played at her feet, his chubby hands stacking wooden blocks with serious concentration. At 10 months old, he already showed Reed's determination and Zara's curious spirit. Reed dismounted, scooping up his son with a laugh before kissing Zara warmly. "How are my two favorite people today?" he asked, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "We're well," Zara replied, leaning into his side as they entered the house together. "Though your son refused his nap again, he's stubborn like his father," Reed grinned, bouncing Thomas on his hip. "Strong-willed like his mother," he countered. The Hayes Ranch had been sold the previous year to a young couple from Ohio, the proceeds invested in expanding the Calloway holdings. The railroad had eventually come through, though on a different route than Coleman had planned, bringing increased prosperity to the region. Miguel remained with them, now more family than employee. He had married a young woman from Silver Creek, and they were expecting their first child in the spring. They lived in a small house Reed had built near the original cabin. That evening, after Thomas had finally been persuaded to sleep, Reed and Zara sat on the porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Reed's arm rested comfortably around Zara's shoulders, her head leaning against him in a pose that had become natural over their years together. "I received a letter from Marshal Grant today," Reed said after a comfortable silence. "Coleman died in prison last week. Fever." Zara absorbed this news quietly. Zachary Coleman had been convicted of murder and numerous other crimes, sentenced to life in the territorial prison. His death brought no joy, but perhaps it brought closure. "May God have mercy on his soul," she said finally. Reed pressed a kiss to her temple, understanding her complex feelings. "You have a generous heart, Mrs. Calloway." "I have a full heart," Zara corrected, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "And it's about to get fuller." Reed went very still, then turned to face her, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning joy. "Zara, are you saying?" She nodded, smiling at his wonderment. "Come spring, Thomas will have a brother or sister." Reed whooped with delight, gathering her into a careful embrace before dropping to his knees to place a gentle kiss on her stomach. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and I are very happy you're coming to join us." Tears of happiness blurred Zara's vision as she watched her husband's tender moment with their unborn child. From the darkest days of her life, bound and captive, her father murdered, her future uncertain, had come this beautiful, unexpected joy. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Reed's hand resting protectively over her stomach, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Reed," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. His voice was drowsy but attentive. "Do you ever think about that night we met? How different our lives might have been if you hadn't ridden by when you did?" Reed was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my mother used to say, that God puts us where we need to be when we need to be there." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I was meant to find you that night, Zara, and you were meant to find me." Zara reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the laugh lines deepening around his eyes. "I believe that too," she said softly. Reed caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "When I saw those rope burns on your wrists, I made a vow that no one would bind you again." His voice grew husky with emotion, but I never imagined how you would free me in return. Free you, Zara echoed, puzzled. From loneliness, Reed explained. From the fear that I would always stand apart, never truly known. He leaned down to kiss her tenderly. You bind me in ways that make me more free, not less, with love, with family, with purpose. Tears stung Zara's eyes at the simple eloquence of his words. As you do me, she whispered against his lips. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang through the cottonwoods, a lullaby as old as the land itself. Inside, in the warmth of their embracing arms, Zara and Reed Calloway built their future one moment, one kiss, one day at a time. No ropes bound them now, only the silken threads of love freely given and joyfully received. And in that willing surrender, they had both found their truest freedom.